Welcome to the wonderful world of wine, exploring all things wine with you. We are your hosts, Mark Lenzi and Kim Simone, and you can find us on Facebook at The Wonderful World of Wine. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the wonderful world of wine. And Merry Christmas, Mark.
Yes, Kim, Merry Christmas to you. Happy holidays to everyone listening out there.
This is our annual Christmas show, and we like to talk about different holiday things when it is holiday time. We always do our Thanksgiving show, what to serve with the bird. And this year, for the holidays, we thought we would like to visit some international traditions around wine.
We're going to call this the holiday wine traditions around the world. We found a few things we talked to the listeners about today. And first, Kim, we'd like to go to England and talk about a tradition there.
So we have a lot of these Northern European wine traditions that revolve around warm wine and spiced wine, right, Mark?
Spiced, yeah. We're going to talk about that when we hit Germany has a tradition, but the English thing is a foodie one that I need to ask you some questions about, Kim, because in England, it's all about port wine and Stilton cheese. Stilton cheese, an English cheese with Portuguese port. And I need a little education, Kim. I'm sure there's a lot of listeners that know Stilton cheese. I've never had it. I've had a lot of port wine. What's your feedback on Stilton cheese?
So Stilton is a strongly flavored cheese, and it is a type of blue cheese, I believe. So it's got these kind of bitter notes to it, but it's also very strongly aromatic. And some of these bigger cheeses are actually really good wine partners because they can stand up to some of our more powerfully flavored wines, but also our higher alcoholic wines. So this is actually a really lovely pairing because some of these higher alcohol wines also have a fair amount of sweetness to them. And when you pair a food that has this kind of strong flavor, maybe a bit of bitterness to it, sometimes some spiciness to it, and some of these cheeses do come across with some heat as well. When you pair that with something that has sugar and has some sweetness, that sweetness will round out those edges and make that cheese taste creamier and softer and a little bit less aggressive. And it's just a really wonderful pairing. Like, there's a reason why this is a classic. These two things really go very well together.
Yeah, in the wine world, port and Stilton cheese, we hear about it. It was on all our exams as we were taking wine education. Like, this is one of the most ideal pairings you can do in the wine world. And you were saying the sweet port complements the tangy, creamy cheese.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a great history on this. I'm thinking it's an English cheese with this Portuguese port. How did this all come about? It's such a tradition there. And the English have been doing this holiday tradition since the 1700s. And there was a little issue long ago the English had with the French. They couldn't get their French wine, so they had to start looking to Portugal. And that led the English to really liking the port wines. And I guess over time, that was their way of celebrating the holidays to bring this back. So,
Yeah, it really
interesting history.
became this, this tradition. We talk an awful lot when we are thinking about wine and food in terms of historical perspective. And it's like, well, why do we eat the things we eat? Why do we drink the things we drink? Why do we put them together? And it really is interesting, I feel like, from my perspective, to see how politics and how wars and the movement of people and things like that really have impacted the kinds of food that come down to us as these traditional foods after a couple of hundred years. And it has always been so fascinating to me that, yes, there was this political strife between England and France, and that caused the English to look further afield into different places for their wines. And they started looking to Spain and Portugal. And for the wines from Portugal in particular, the whole concept of these fortified sweet port wines, this was really where they had their creation and had their birth. So a lot of these port houses actually were either are still owned by English companies or were started by English companies. So when we think of something like Taylor Fladgate, that is not a very Portuguese sounding name or brand. It was started by the English. And so these wines really had the market kind of cornered in England because they were started by Englishmen. So these were wines that were made for the English market and were consumed primarily in England or in the English colonies for a while. And it kind of developed that, hey, this wine goes particularly well with this native English cheese, and put these things together. And it was just really a lovely match. So one of those things that history has dictated kind of some of our modern pairings. And I always love that about food and why we eat the things that we eat.
And let's talk again, Kim, with the listeners about port, because there are two real styles of port that are popular, the tawny port and the ruby port. And for this pairing, they are suggesting tawny port, correct?
Tawny port, yes. I actually
It's
find generally that tawny port is a little bit more of a food-friendly port than some of the ruby ports, because the rubies, especially like the vintage ports, can be a little bit more aggressive. They're a bit more expensive. You need to age them for a while. But I feel like the tawnies are very accessible and a little bit easier to find in the market too.
Yeah, and I like to say a tawny port for description. It's more of a nuttiness versus the grapiness of a
Yeah.
ruby port.
That's a great description. Yeah, so you get nutty caramel kind of notes in the tawny ports, and they're brown in color, so they kind of have lost their red wine, red grapey kind of a color, and so they take on these not only aromas and flavors of like nuts and burnt sugar and toffee and caramel, but the color is kind of reminiscent of those things as well.
And it's a great dessert wine for like dried fruits, nuts, of course.
Yep,
But
exactly.
like we said earlier, it's a very popular pairing. But around here, I don't think it's something people are running to the store to buy Stilton cheese to have with their port.
No, but I will say that these fortified wines do tend to be the kind of thing that when they get taken off the shelf and put on the table, it does tend to be during holiday time. So I certainly do every once in a while plop my decanter full of tawny port down on the Christmas Eve table and be like, hey, everybody, let's have a little glass of this and try it with the pecan pie or with that big bowl of nuts in the middle of the table, right, Mark? That we
Yeah.
Italians like to
Yeah.
have at
Yeah.
the holiday table. Really good
Have it with some
really
port.
good with the pecans.
Yeah, I agree. I just like it this time of year, a cool night, winter night. You just, a nice glass of port warms you up. So I can
Yep.
see making it a holiday tradition, which would be special. And it was interesting, Kim. I was reading that the other holiday tradition, I don't know if you saw this with the English, is they inject the cheese with the port.
Ooh, no, I did
So
not see that one.
I had to ask you how, I mean, what they were saying is they cut the top off the cheese, which I assume is like there's maybe a rind on it or
Okay.
something. They scoop out a little inside the cheese and then they put like a funnel in it and pour in the port, and then they make holes in the cheese. So they keep filling port in the holes of the cheese. They wrap it in saran wrap.
Is this
But
still
like,
Stilton we're talking about, or is this a
yeah,
different kind of
yeah.
cheese?
No,
This is
this
still
is
the
still,
Stilton.
yeah, it's all the tradition. The Stilton cheese is their cheese. So
Fascinating.
yeah, and then they fill it, they wrap it in saran wrap, and like over 2 week period, they keep filling the holes, letting it soak in, and eventually using a whole bottle of port
Woohoo!
soaking into the cheese.
So now it's boozy cheese.
Yeah. It didn't say like I'm curious if that's how they prep it to serve it for the holiday with the
Yeah,
cheese. I mean with the port, which would be really like
that seems like a lot of port.
yeah, be very in port to remind our listeners is also usually 19.5 to 20.5% alcohol because it's fortified. So it can come up on you.
Yeah.
You got to be careful.
I'm gonna have to ask some of my English friends about the port in the cheese.
And the Stilton cheese, they said, was named after a village in England, and it became a protected cheese, like wine is protected in the EU, and other cheeses from Italy we talked about in the past protected.
Yep. France
And-
too.
Yeah, in 1996 it became a protected PDO cheese. So I've never seen it on the shelf. Have you seen it on a shelf around here, Kim?
Seen Stilton?
Yeah.
I have, but whether those are actually following the letter of the law and are authentic Stiltons is probably a different question. I know I have seen things that have been labeled as Stilton, so the next time I take a look in the cheese counter, I will see if they actually are from England.
You have to let us know. There was
I
some
will.
talk about there's only so many villages or towns that can technically make
Mm-hmm.
it, and over the years, one goes out of business, someone else has to pick it
Oh,
up.
yeah.
But interesting. So the English tradition of port and Stilton cheese. Next, Kim, we're going to go to Germany.
Yeah.
Let's tell our listeners about the holiday wine traditions of Germany.
So, one of the wine traditions of Germany, made famous by Christmas songs of Here We Come a Wassailing, is Wassail. And this is a, correct me if I'm wrong, but a warmed spiced wine, Mark?
Wassail, like listen to you. No,
Wassail.
that song, I never even heard that
Yeah.
part of it
Here
at
we come
all.
a
Are,
wassailing.
are we talking the same thing as the glue? Is it
Glühwein.
glug wine?
Yeah.
Same thing.
Glühwein.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, so German spiced wine, and they say it's a tradition since like the 15th century. Supposedly in Germany, you can get this already made in a bottle by the wineries, but
Mm-hmm.
it's nothing you see here. And the key to it supposedly is balancing the red fruit and the spice of so it's not too fruity or too spicy, and then
Right.
you heat it up. And we've talked in the past about mulled wine, and you had your secret recipe, I believe, on mulled wine. Have you ever dabbled in this German style?
I have not made it myself, but I have heard from friends and family members who travel to Europe, and especially during the holiday season, that this is very common in like outdoor holiday markets. So there's a lot of this tradition, not only in Germany, but also in France and in also the Low Countries, where there are these beautiful outdoor holiday markets during December, and people will buy a mug of this spiced wine and walk around when they're doing their shopping, kind of like we do with hot cocoa here in the States. They have this tradition of these warm spiced wine concoctions that kind of fill the same niche that we use here for hot cocoa when you're either looking at the Christmas lights or going to do a market or something like that. So this is definitely a thing I have heard from a number of friends and family of mine.
And the traditional red wine they use, Kim, is German Pinot Noir, which
Mm-hmm.
you love to say. What do they call Pinot Noir in German?
Spotburgunder.
Bodbrigan. I always have to let Kim
Spotburgunder.
say
I
the
know you
words.
always let me do the
You only
pronunciation.
you only say it so many times a year here on the show. So yes,
Spotburgunder.
Bodbrigander is German Pinot Noir. So if you're in the Pinot Noir section here in the United States and you see that on the label, you know it is a German Pinot Noir.
That's
They
right.
like using that because it's fruity and it's light. And when you warm it up, it really brings up like the aroma of the fruit.
Yeah.
So
I actually think it's really lovely because you don't get a lot of tannins. You know, you almost get this kind of the equivalent of having like a mulled cider where you have some of the tartness and you have some of the fruitiness, but you're not overwhelmed by alcohol. You're not overwhelmed by tannins. It's a nice style of wine to use for this type of a concoction.
So for our listeners, I'll give you, Kim, the basic recipe I saw. One bottle of Pinot Noir. So 25 ounces of wine, one medium orange that you slice, 3 to 4 cinnamon sticks, 8 to 10 whole cloves of, what is it? Cinnamon.
Cloves.
Cloves. Oh,
Cloves.
cloves. Whole cloves. Yeah. Okay.
You were about to
And
put garlic in that, weren't you?
yeah, yeah. I was thinking cinnamon sticks, but that's next. 3 to 4 cinnamon sticks, 6 whole star anise, and 4 to 6 tablespoons sugar or honey.
Mm.
You pour the wine in a saucepan, you add sugar or honey, you add the orange and the cheesecloth, you'd put the cinnamon, the anise, and the cloves. You heat, don't boil, 20 to 30 minutes, and you serve it hot in that fancy little German mug that you have. Do you have a different recipe or modification you would make to it, Kim?
So mine is actually quite similar to this. There's a lot of the same spices. Sometimes you could put a little bit of ginger in as well. I'm not as big a fan of star anise, so I wouldn't put too much of that kind of licoricey flavored spice in there. Maybe do a little nutmeg as well. So maybe change up those spices a little bit, but the same kind of spices that you would use for gingerbread or pumpkin pie or, your pumpkin spice latte kind of thing are great in these warm, cold weather type of mulled wine situations.
I was going to say the star anise seems like that would be the most overpowering of
Yep,
the.
you have to be judicious with your use of it. I do keep some in my kitchen for a number of mostly Chinese recipes, but a little bit goes a long way.
And you're a beekeeper. Would you use your honey or would you use sugar?
I would totally use my honey.
Yeah, I figured that.
Yeah.
Fresh honey.
Yeah,
Good.
I would use my honey.
And interesting, I was thinking like a fruitier wine, or as I say, a grapier style wine would work better, but most of those might be a little bit too heavy or too more tannin in it
Yeah.
than the Pinot. So maybe that's why they've chosen Pinot. But they really, what other red do they really have in Germany that?
Yeah, I think a lot of that probably has to do with what is able to be grown fairly well up in those colder climates. And Pinot Noir really is, if you have any reds that are being grown in Germany, Pinot, where it's at. So that doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, you use what you got. And so in other parts of the wine growing world, you would probably see a different grape variety. But I kind of like this idea of using something that's a little bit lighter bodied. I think that sounds like it would have this nice refreshing kick to it. And I like the use of citrus in there too. The orange, I think that is a nice addition.
And I did have to Google because I did see a couple of blogs that said there is a white wine version of this, and it didn't say what they used, but there were people like you said, where your friends went there. They were in these markets and they had a white version of it, but it didn't state what they use. And I mean, once again, Riesling is big there. Would you use a Riesling for this?
I think you could use a Riesling and then just cut out, if it's a sweeter style of Riesling, just don't add the additional sugar or don't add the honey.
Yeah,
So that
true.
would be
Yeah.
like one of those things where it's like, well, taste it as you go and figure out how to adapt your recipe to what your ingredients are telling you. And that's also like, I mean, it's not the right season, but that's how I make my sangrias too. It's like maybe your wine has a little bit more sweetness to it than somebody else's wine. So you taste as you go and you add the appropriate amount of sugar so that you have something with good balance, because that's really what it's all about is a balanced, lovely beverage.
Have you ever heated up a white wine like that?
I have
Like
not made white wine mulled things, but certainly red wines quite a few times.
Yeah, the red seems more appealing to me for some reason to heat up. So that's the German tradition. They didn't mention anything about food with this holiday tradition, unless you saw something, Kim, but I guess they just like
Did
to
not.
drink.
I think it's just something to have a nice warm beverage to sip on.
Happy holidays, everybody. You're listening to The Wonderful World of Wine, and we are your hosts, Mark and Kim, exploring all things wine with you. For more information about Kim, you can go to her website, commonwealthwineschool.com. For more information about myself, you can go to franklinliquors.com. Our program is supported by Franklin Public Radio. You can find all our past episodes on SoundCloud and iTunes, and you have any questions or comments, you can find us on Facebook at The Wonderful World of Wine. We're back talking holiday wine traditions around the world. We've talked about England, we talked about Germany, and the other one we found, Kim, or we want to revisit, we talked about this in depth last year with Ciro, is in Italy, the Feast of the Fishes. I think this is probably the most popular holiday tradition in the world that a lot of people here celebrate more than probably the German and the English holiday tradition. And I kind of wanted to follow up with you because I was thinking about this, I wouldn't say all year, Cam, but as we get to the holiday here and in the holiday time, when we talked about the fish pairing with wine, I was curious about white wine pairing with shellfish versus regular fish. Do you think there should be a difference in selecting a wine? Because at the seven fishes, there's shellfish and regular fish dish, there's salty. Do you think we should be looking at different styles of white wine to pair with the different courses or stick with one style of white wine?
I think it depends on your audience and who you have around your table with you. If you have a bunch of wine geeks and you want to do a different wine with every course and make this fabulous, fun, detailed experience out of it, I think that is amazing. And I would encourage you to do that if you have those people around your table. But I think for the most part, keeping it simple is a little bit of a better way to go. I know personally we have wine drinkers, but not necessarily people who want to focus all of their attention on the pairings. We've also got a gajillion little kids around the table. And so we tend to be focusing a little bit more on them and talking and less about the pairings. So I think that it is easier to find maybe one or two different white wines that will go with a variety of things on the table. And yes, there is some nuance as to, oh, this style of wine will go with this style of fish, or you want this with finny fish versus you want this with shellfish. And there's a difference between putting something with, say, lobster and then putting it with, I don't know, cod or something fairly light. So there is variety that you can have, but I think for a holiday where it's more about being with the people and having everybody around you and having the food and the wine be, I don't want to say tangential to that experience, but it makes the experience better, but it's not necessarily 100% the focus of where you want to be giving all of your attention.
Yeah, because you could go crazy. You could
You could
get
do lots
geeky
of
and
different things, yeah.
yeah.
But it also depends on what people like. So, like in my case, I would love to go completely geeky and do a new wine for every two courses, but I don't think that everybody would necessarily appreciate it. No offense to my in-laws.
Yeah. I know where
Because
you're coming
because
from.
because in like in a less hectic situation, maybe it would be more appreciated. But Christmas Eve tends to be a little hectic around most people's tables. So
It's tough at the holidays because you have people coming over. You really might not know their style. You don't want to really get what just you like all the time because
exactly.
it's a hard sell, right? I mean, and that's why I think at the holiday times when I see people shopping for wine, I think of people. I think a lot of people go to the same things, the same brands, because they figure I'll get a big brand wine because it's popular, so it should be popular with my guests, and they might not like it, but they want to satisfy their guests with the wine. And a lot of times I don't think they're really thinking about the pairings. They're just kind of thinking
Yeah.
about making everybody happy at the holiday when they're celebrating and eating the food. But that was my Italian question, Kim. I just wanted to see shellfish versus regular if you thought it was a big thing people should focus on this holiday.
I often have the same recommendations for whitefish as I do for shellfish. So even if I was doing a different wine for every course, I still probably would focus on a lot of things that would be really versatile and would go with a number of different things anyway.
Bubbly, bubbly, bubbly.
Ah, bubbly.
All right.
And rosé with the shrimp. So if you're doing shrimp cocktail, do rosé.
You always say rosé with salmon too, right?
I do. I do
Pink
pink
with
food with
pink.
pink wine.
There you go.
One of my favorite, and I know I've said this before, but one of my favorite food and wine pairings is dry rosé with shrimp scampi. And I would say every other year at Christmas Eve, we have something shrimp scampi-ish, and it is just so good. There is something about the shrimp and the garlic with the rosé. It is just wonderful. So if you also have garlic bread on your table, maybe you've got steamed mussels and you've got your uncle's famous garlic bread going with the steamed mussels, rosé is going to be amazing with that.
So the last thing I want to talk about for traditions, Kim, and this was something I thought of as I was searching traditions around the world, and I was thinking about us here in the United States. And what would you say is a wine holiday tradition here in the United States, or an alcohol tradition here in the United States?
I mean, aside from opening up, a bottle of champagne or whatever on New Year's Eve, I think people
Yeah, that's
just
that's the New
we're
Year's,
going for
but yeah, I mean, what
far as
about
like, Christmas or Hanukkah or any of those. I don't, because we're so diverse, I feel in those holiday traditions that there's not anything universally American. I feel like for the Christmas holiday and what we drink. I think people generally, if they don't drink a lot of wine throughout the course of the year, will have a glass of wine at Christmas or, a glass of a mimosa in the morning or, something like that. But I don't think that there's any real universal American wine tradition to go around with the holidays aside from New Year's Eve. That's all over the world too, so that's not just us.
well, it seems like here to me it's more individual than historic or any,
Yeah, I think it comes
you
down to
know.
what your family traditions are and where did your family come from or what traditions have been adopted by your family or have been developed by your family, over the course of years or a couple of generations. So I think a lot of it is very personal.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned a few things. Mimosas. I was thinking eggnog. I was thinking Bloody Marys. Those are kind of the holiday
Yeah, I love a good eggnog.
beverages I've seen around here. So the last thing I just want to ask and give our listeners some advice, Kim, from us is gift ideas. It's holiday time, the wine people in your life. We always have little suggestions. In the past years, we've talked about some wine choices. So if someone is looking for a wine gift, what would be your go-to or suggestion for people when they're shopping?
So I always say that everybody needs to have a really good corkscrew and not one of the ones with the wings, but a really good waiter's corkscrew. And you can find these for not a crazy amount of money. It just has to be solid and not like wiggly. You know, if you put up the handle and it kind of jiggles back and forth a little bit, that's not necessarily a great opener. You need something that's solid and really can stand up to a lot of bottles being opened. I also recommend, especially, well, it doesn't matter if you drink a lot of sparkling wine. Everybody should have a couple of champagne stoppers on hand because chances are you will have a party and you'll have a bottle of maybe champagne or maybe just Prosecco or Cava or something with bubbles in it, and you want to cap it with something that is not going to let the bubbles go away, but also is a safe cap for your bottle of bubbly because pressure does build up in that bottle. And if you put a regular cork in there, eventually it will pop out and you don't want anybody to get hurt if they're standing too close to it. So a couple of champagne stoppers, I think make great stocking stuffers, are a really good gift idea. And I think I have a new one this year. I don't know if I've spoken about this one before. Have I talked about the Ito preserver?
No, what's that?
It's this carafe that has like a plunger with a little bit of like a suction thing on the bottom. So you pour your half-drunk bottle of wine into the carafe and then you press down on the plunger and it creates an airtight seal on top of your wine. So no oxygen can get to it. So you're not blanketing it with any like inert gas or anything. You're just kind of creating a perfect seal where no air can get to it. And then you can just pop off the top and just pour it right from that carafe. So it works really well. I have a couple of them. I got them as I actually was initially when it was a Kickstarter, I had signed up for Kickstarter for it, which was like 5 years, maybe more ago. And now they're kind of all over the place and they're being advertised
Sounds like a
by
coffee
famous
press.
people and stuff. It kind of, yeah, it almost feels like a French press when you're pressing down the plunger, but it works really well. So to keep an open bottle of wine for a few days or more and keep it from being exposed to too much air, it works really well. So I would suggest that. ETO is how you spell it. It's an Ito.
Nice. The gadget route. Kim's talking
Preservation.
gadgets. Yeah.
You know,
no,
like
no, that's good because a lot of
I
people
mean,
might
wine
not have
preservation.
those things, and it's a good to give those as a gift. You can make a little gift basket with all little gadgets in it for a holiday gift.
Absolutely.
That would be nice.
What about yours? Do you have anything new on your
Not really
list?
gadgets as much as I just like to kind of give the same train of thought and advice as a retailer is just to try to stay away from the big brands because people can easily put a price to it. You don't have to
Oh, as
spend.
far as the wines themselves
Yeah,
go.
the wine selection. You don't have to spend a lot of money. Based on your budget, you can find a lot of good bottles, but stay away from the big brands when giving as a gift. Give them something different, and you can make a lot of good, what I like to call like comparison gifts, like give a bottle of Prosecco with a bottle of Cava. Give two
Ooh.
things to compare. Give a red Bordeaux with an American red blend, that type of thing. So if you know they drink like a Pothic red blend or something like that, give them a Bordeaux, give them a blend from another part of the world to try to let them experience something different that they won't go buy for themselves.
Yeah.
Because the people that are on brands are going to stick to that brand. Let them know there's something else out there in the wine world this holiday.
Yeah. That's one of my recommendations for people is if you know what somebody ordinarily drinks, give them something that is similar but different and that they wouldn't go out and get for themselves because you know, as a listener of this show, you know a little bit more than probably a lot of other people do about wine. So you know the right questions to ask and you know who to go to. And I think that those thoughtful wine gifts where you know a little bit about what somebody likes and you've put some thought into what they might like that's a little bit different. I think that is a really thoughtful holiday gift.
Yeah, so our 2 cents for holiday giving and the holiday traditions around the world, something a little different this year. So Merry Christmas to you and your family, Kim, and to all our listeners, very happy holidays.
Merry Christmas, everyone. Happy holidays and enjoy them with your friends and family. Thank you for listening to us today on The Wonderful World of Wine. We have been your hosts, Kim Simone and Mark Lenzi. You can find us on Facebook at The Wonderful World of Wine. Please leave us your questions and comments. You can find everything about our current and past show on our Facebook page. Our past shows are available on SoundCloud and iTunes. More information about Mark at franklinliquors.com and more information about myself at commonwealthwineschool.com. We are supported by Franklin Public Radio, and happy holidays, everyone. Cheers!